Hello, welcome back to my channel and Happy New Year. I know I've already posted one video this year and I'm struggling to find time and space, as you can see, to film videos. It's been a very busy start to the year and I'm currently in the kitchen of our new house and hopefully in the next few months this will be a whole new different kitchen. So, this background is only temporary and only because this is the best light in the house right now. And I don't have a lot of books these days. I have one box of books in the house only and everything else is in storage. So yeah, so no beautiful backgrounds of books for a while probably as well. But anyway, today we're celebrating books because I want to take a few minutes, probably more than a few, but to bring you my favorite books of 2023. I read 109 books in 2023, so it was difficult to pick the, 10 best or whatever, but I ended up picking 10 fiction and 5 nonfiction that are making the top of my list. So we'll start with fiction, and they're not in any particular order in terms of enjoyment. They are in order that I read them in the year. So we're starting in January and then heading up toward the end of the year. So the first book on my list is one that when I read it, I knew it was going to be one of my favorites, and it wasn't like dethroned in the year. It stayed in my top, and it is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I just loved the imagination of it linked into the realistic kind of storytelling, with colonialism and stuff like that, and then all of the language aspects of it. And even though it's a little bit preachy, and I think like R.F. Kuang has fallen into that more and more with her books, I actually still really enjoyed it because I think sometimes preachy messaging like goes really well in fiction. So yeah, I actually really loved it, and I couldn't believe that by the end, like how it was so gut-wrenching and I was so immersed in it. So yeah, I loved it. Then we have A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I actually read both books that are currently out in the Monk and Robot series, kind of back to back because I just loved it, but I wanted to pick one for this list, so I've picked the first one. I think it just fits really well in her voice of Becky Chambers in terms of it being very inclusive, very kind of welcoming, people finding their family and finding people that they really kind of gel with in a sense. And I thought that this was just really beautiful, and I guess the robot AI version of it is just really relevant. I feel like this year especially, there's been a lot of chat about that, so I thought that was really, really nice. The next book that I loved in 2023, I read in March, and it was for the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. And anyone who's viewed my videos for that will not be surprised by the fact that this was Wandering Souls by Cécile Pin. I absolutely adored this book. I thought it was short. It said a lot in a very kind of concise way. It explored different perspective as well, which I really enjoyed actually, because I'm currently rereading Homegoing by Agassi, and I think it's like this intergenerational perspective that I really appreciated about Wandering Souls. And yeah, I thought it was really beautiful, great debut, and I really recommend it. And next we have another one that I read for the Women's Prize, and this was in May, so a bit later, and I'm guessing it was for the shortlist at that point, and it was A Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. This is a book that actually really surprised me because I went in with a bit of expectation of it being a bit of a hype book and being like, I don't know, the setting of it in Italy by a Northern Irish author, set it on like, I guess, a poem, My Last Duchess, and just all of it, I was just like, it's a bit weird. I wasn't sure what to expect. And then I got in, and the perspectives, like the two different timelines, and I just was kind of on the edge of my seat the whole time. And then the kind of sort of plot twist at the end, and I was just like, and plot twists that do it right, they just get me. Like I'm just sold on that book immediately. And that was one where when I got to the end, I was like, yes, I love that book. Next, we have two books that I read in July, and they were books that I read when I was home in Canada, so 2 books in French. The first is Coucou by Michel Jean. This is a book that I feel like it's at the cusp between fiction and nonfiction, because this is based on the author's grandmother, who was a white woman who married into like First Nation community. So she fell in love with this boy and then went in to live in their community, and it traces a long way, like her whole life basically, of transition in that community in the world of kind of First Nations living in Quebec, which changed a lot. We see them like heading north to go hunting in the winter, and then at some point, you know, when the I don't know the word in English, it's really struggling. But we see like the change of the landscape with companies coming in to do the cut of trees and to take over the rivers, and it becomes like private ownership, and they're just like, but it's nature. And then the reality of living on reserves. I don't know if that's also the word they use in English, but in French we call them réserves. Just the treatment of people, and then when they took away children to put them in the residential schools, and it just seems to span like such like an amazing like history of it, and the reality of it is so important to see. And then there's that personal aspect, you know, because it is tied to the author who says at the end how he remembers his grandma like telling stories and stuff like that. So yeah, an absolutely beautiful book that I recommend. I think it's come out in English as well, so highly recommend anyone, especially in Canada and North America generally, to read. Then the second book in French that I read in July was Oscar et la Dame Rose by Éric Emmanuel Schmitt. This is Oscar and the Pink Lady, I'm gonna call it, by a Belgian-French author. And I read this, I think, in one sitting. It is quite short, and it is a series of letters that this boy who's going through cancer treatment in a hospital, I think he's actually in a hospice at that point, and he's writing a series of letters to God. And also he meets this lady who wears pink, and she becomes a bit like his confidant on him understanding that he's dying and feeling that it's very unfair because he wished he lived a full life. And then he starts like this little exercise of writing like, ooh, today I'm actually 20, you know, it's young adulthood, and it's just like speaking about the different phases of life. And by the end I was sobbing, and it was just really, really touching. And yeah, 100% recommend it. I don't have words. I'm like still touched like thinking about it. Next we have, I think this is my top book of the year actually. I haven't been doing them in ranking because sometimes it's difficult to compare, you know, apples and oranges, but A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. I closed that book and I was literally like, this is one of the best books I've ever read. And it was definitely my top book of the year. I read it in August, and none of the other books I read that year dethroned that, and it definitely dethroned everything else that I read that year. So yeah, my top book of 2023. What an incredible storytelling. Again, I think it's the historical aspects, the relations between especially the two women that we see through the journey. And lots of people actually recommended that I start with this because of the female dynamic, and honestly it really touched me a lot. There's some such tough bits, like horrible, but because it deals with like domestic abuse and just, yeah, there's some horrific stuff that happens, but I feel like Khaled Hosseini doesn't dwell in it. Like, he's not all about the misery, and that's what I appreciate about his writing. So yeah, oh god, by the end, I feel like the end, it has a hopeful note. And if you follow my channel, you know that I can deal with some misery, but also I don't like to dwell in it. I like for it to be realistic, and it can be hard-hitting, but then I feel like for me to feel like a sense of, I don't know, a good sense of it when I finish this book, and not just feel like I've just been wrung, you know, I wanted a little bit of hope, and I feel like Hosseini did that with this book, and I love it. My mom's reading it right now on my recommendation. So yeah, I recommend it to everyone. Then we have The Stories Grandma Forgot and How I Found Them by Nadine Aisha Yassat, who is a friend of mine. I saw her first novel came out. It's a novel in verse as well. Her first novel came out. I was like, obviously I'm gonna buy it. Hello, like, I'm obviously always gonna just buy immediately if I know someone, they've published a book. I feel like that's the least that I can do. And then I read it, I think I read it in 2 sittings. So I started it one night and I got through half, and then the second night I was like, oh, I'll just read a little bit. But then I literally went to bed so late because I just finished it. And I was really taken by the storyline. So the little girl in this story is kind of like a middle grade, I want to say. The little girl in the story, her father is not present and she doesn't really know what's happened. Her grandma lives with her and her mom, and she's sort of helping to take care of her because she clearly has on like Alzheimer or something, dementia. So which is why the story's grandma forgot, because sometimes she just says words and then she learns something about her father and she's just like, wait, what? So she decides to go and look after this mystery, you know, right? To find out what happened, because no one's talking about it in her house. And she finds that, you know, friendship with a boy, and she stands up to bullies, and she's just... This is like a book I wish I'd read at that age. Like, I closed it and I just loved it. I love the cultural elements as well, and the family and the friendship. I thought it was beautifully done. It just really touched me, this book, and I'm adding it on my list not because I know Nadine, but because when I closed it and like weeks and weeks later, like the story really followed me and I kept thinking about it. So I think that that is the sign, you know, that the book has really touched you. So here it is on my list. Then I have Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson. Again, probably not a surprise because his debut, Open Water, was my favorite book of the... I think it was a previous... I think I read it in 2022. Or was it 2021? Whichever. Whenever I read it, it was my favorite book of the year. Loved it. I did a whole review on it because I was like obsessed with it. And then I got Small Worlds and I started it, and I find it difficult to start. But once I was in it, I just loved it. I just love the vulnerability that Caleb Azuma Nelson is able to really translate on his male characters on the page, and it's just really beautiful. And I feel like this was a quieter novel than Open Water, because it's in the U, and I just felt like it had a lot of features that made it like pop out, and this one felt quieter, and I feel people have been talking about it less. I feel like Small Worlds was better crafted, and it is, you know, his second novel, so it makes sense. So yeah, I actually ended up really loving it in the end, and yeah, I'm continuing my love of Caleb Azuma Nelson. And finally, my last top fiction book of 2023 is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I loved that book. Oh my god, I can't believe it. I started reading it because it was on my library and it was available, and I was like, I'll read it for Victober while I'm waiting on my other holds to come in. And then I got so taken. It felt so modern. It felt so... I don't know. There was something... Even like the female characters, even written from the era by a man, I just thought it was just so interesting. And they weren't just like there to be pretty or to be accessories. And I love the, you know, Van Helsing character, the professor. And yeah, I just thought it was not at all what I expected. And I think maybe that's why I was like really pleasantly surprised, and it really stayed with me. When I finished it, I was like, ooh, I want to go back and reread it to like get more of it. And I think, again, that's an excellent sign. So those were the 10 books that I read. Again, very, very genre, very countries and authors, but all books that I absolutely love and 100% recommend. And now let's dive, you know, quickly, because I know I've talked for a little bit, on my 5 favorite nonfiction. And I did 5 nonfiction because some of these books that I read, I just really loved. And I thought, why not mention them? You know, it's always good to read a bit more nonfiction, so might as well give some recommendation. So the first one is Misfits, a personal manifesto by Michaela Cole. This is a very short book, and it's based on a speech that she's given, and it's on being a misfit, on standing up for what you believe, and on, you know, just standing out as well. And I just thought it was really powerful. I read it, it's the first book I read last year, I think, and it really started me the year right. I think I was like, it kind of almost pumped me up. And she discusses some like harder things that happened to her, but I just thought like the personal aspect of it and the way she writes is just really, really compelling. Then all 4 other books I actually read for nonfiction November. So I started the year with Misfit in January, and then all these other books are from November and then into December. So the first one is the Literary Almanac by Francesca Bowman. This is, actually I read this one along the year. I bought it in 2022. God, last year I was gonna say, but 2022. And I found it like in a charity shop, and I thought it looked so beautiful. And it's basically recommendations of things to read for each month and each season and each kind of like things that you might feel. So obviously for February it has kind of romance, and then for, you know, the start of the year it's about resolutions, and at the end of the year it's more like Christmas and like being cozy in the winter. So it has, you know, the wide spectrum of themes and moods. So I read for each month as I went along. So obviously finished at the end of November to read for December, and I just thought it was beautiful book. Like visually, I don't have, it's in a book so I can show you. I have the printed version. It's really beautiful illustrations, lots and lots of recommendations, and little summaries to like kind of tease you into why you may enjoy it, or you know, why you should pick it up. So recommended for all the book nerds out there, which I'm sure you all are. Then we have Dear Dolly by Dolly Alderton. I picked this up again as a bit of a, it was on my library app, I picked it up, I thought why not. I've enjoyed her Everything I Know About Love, which I'm not gonna lie, when I picked up I thought it was by Dolly Parton. Had never heard about Dolly Alderton at this point, then started listening to the podcast, and then here we are. So I knew it wasn't Dear Dolly Parton, but so this is based on columns that she's writing, and she gives advice, and my goodness, she gives good advice. I loved reading through this and through the different themes as well as she's put, either it's heartbreak or fitting in or fitness or whichever thing she was discussing. And I just also love that I forget in which part of the book she mentions how it's always good to think of both sides, because obviously when people write, they're very much from their perspective, but we don't know what the story on the other side is. So I think that I like that she was trying to be well balanced about it. And yeah, I thought it was actually a really good book and really easy to just get through. So I recommend, if you're looking for that kind of wee insight, or if you really like Dolly Alderton, you might enjoy this. Then we have Blurb Your Enthusiasm by Louise Wilder, or Wilder, I think it's Wilder. This is actually, I think the tagline is an A to Z of literary persuasion, and it's basically Louise Wilder is a blurb writer. That's her career. She made her life out of writing blurbs for books. And she talks about what makes a good blurb, what, you know, we've all read the blurbs, and these are things that either catch us, like what's really good, what doesn't really sell. She talks also about titles, taglines, covers, just good plots as well. Lots of book recommendation as well. And I just thought it was a really cool book, like as someone who's really interested in like the publishing industry and books and words as well, just like the craft of writing something concise, catchy, you know, all of it. Yeah, I found it so insightful, and there's lots of writing tips in it as well. So if you love writing as well, you might enjoy it. So yeah, I actually really surprised me how much I enjoyed like every chapter and every like tidbits of knowledge she was sharing. And finally, the last book that I want to mention in this video that I read, and it was also for nonfiction, November, but I think my hold came in a bit late, so I read it into December, and it is The Light We Carry by Michelle Obama. I loved her book Becoming, and I just love her personal story. I think she sounds like politics aside, if you want, I think she sounds like a really like driven woman. She seems to have done so much, and I love this story when she talks about her family and like obviously where she's come from. I mean, like her parents and her brother. And then obviously when she becomes a mother, when she becomes the first lady and all of that. But in The Light We Carry, she discusses more like, how do we keep going? How do we keep having hope and all of these kind of positive things through the negative. So basically, I think this was probably written in and around the pandemic. And, you know, we've all gone through a lot. How is it 4 years, right? Anyway. I find her very inspiring. So I just love to hear her thoughts and her, I guess her words of encouragement and inspiration. And I thought this book did a very similar, I think this was more inspirational than like actually about her life, like what Becoming was more. But I think together, like they make a really good pair of books, and I really enjoyed both. So this was it for my favorite books of 2023. There's obviously another 94 books that I read this year. I didn't enjoy all of them, Dolphin, but I feel like this was a good overview of the top books of the year and the kind of genres and themes that I really adore. I would love to know what your favorite book of the year was, so please feel free to share in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching and haste to be back. Bye!